So I've heard that there's a possibility of Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico becoming their own states. Here's what I have to think about that. I'll start with Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has nothing to offer as a state that it doesn't offer already. Now, it seems to be mostly the Democrats pushing for it, and the reasons they've given are one, so that the citizens of Washington, D.C. have proper representation like everybody else. And another reason for it is racism. So, here's my question. Outside of the government, in the city itself, what racism is noteworthy enough to say it's a problem? At least such a problem that DC needs to be a state. It isn't there. That's a lie. And number two, if it's about the citizens having proper delegation, just merge it back into Maryland. I bet you Maryland will take it in a heartbeat. Washington, D.C. is its own district for a reason. It's to balance out power so that no one state has preference over another. And no state has anything to gain from it. Because if DC's made a state, it's going to call the shots. It's going to be the preferential state. And it already has 3 electoral votes, the same amount it would have if it was made a state. The only thing they gain is 2 senators, and and their representative gets voting powers. This is just a ploy of the Democrats to gain more power in Congress. DC should never be a state. That will damage states' rights. Now, as for Puerto Rico being a state, actually, before you get to Puerto Rico, there's another problem with it. If the Democrats just try and make DC a state to get more power in Congress, then they can expect the Republicans to do the same when they have control of Congress. Namely, like for example, there's been talk of breaking Eastern Oregon off from Oregon and merging it with Idaho. And then after that, breaking Northern California off from California and merging that with Idaho to group together the conservatives. If the Democrats open this can of worms, the Republicans are much more likely to follow. And they can do it for the same reason. Voter representation. Of course, we would all know it's about power, just like it is with Washington, D.C. and the Democrats. This is not going to end well for anybody. Now, as for Puerto Rico, I think it'd be really cool to see a 51st state. The problem is, Puerto Rico has such a poverty problem that they would take more capital than they would put into they would have more taxes spent on them than they give back, and that would bankrupt the country faster. Now, having said that, with how Congress has behaved and at the rate things are going, it's only a matter of time before this country goes bankrupt. So, do we buy ourselves time to avoid this catastrophe, or do we rip off this Band-Aid and bring on board Puerto Rico, accelerate the process, and then once we recover from the next Great Depression, we have Puerto Rico on board? I'm not sure. On the flip side, though, there would be some economic opportunities with Puerto Rico that would at least buy us some time. Like, for example, we could see it become a cruise ship hub for Caribbean cruises, because Puerto Rico is pretty central. We'd see additional military bases there, because right now it's a territory, but if it became a state, it would be defended like a state. It's just like Hawaii or Alaska. That would put in a little bit of capital. And I don't know if we could also see it as a retirement go-to for seniors. There was one other one I was going to. Oh, yeah. And I don't know what it is about state versus territory. But for whatever reason, Americans seem to be much more comfortable traveling within our borders. We go to states more than we go to other countries or even our own territories. And so, I'm not sure what it is about statehood, even whether or not we like their politics or not. For whatever reason, statehood is respected like in the back of our minds. And as such, Puerto Rico would be traveled to like a state instead of a territory. So that would increase their tourism. There's a lot of opportunity. There are some real economic bonuses that could come from this, but it would bankrupt us faster. But here's the last problem: the Puerto Ricans would vote Democrat because it's the Democrats that tend to favor the poor like they favor any other one of their perceived victims. And Puerto Rico would vote for them so that they could get the food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, all that, Social Security. So I think it's a ploy of the Democrats to, once again, get more electoral votes, get more power in Congress. Having said that, I would love to see a 51st state.